Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to this session and looking at me, listening to my slides, talking about security in Flutter application. In fact, whatever I will explain today, it can apply to any mobile application. It's not particularly for Flutter. However, some of the solution that I will explain today, it's very Flutterish. So I hope that you can take away, even if you are an Android developer, that's definitely something that you can take away from this talk and apply it to your Android mobiles as well. But before we get started, show me you are still energetic. Woo! One more time. Woo! That's good. So it gives me energy. So let's get started. So in fact, when I was preparing this talk, this idea is around with me maybe for a couple of months. And I've been researching a lot, and I've faced many surveys and websites with different numbers. But one number that I feel like it's very accurate is this one. Some of these lead industry companies for security, they've done some survey and they realized that actually 75% of mobile applications fail even the basic security risk, or let's say security test. That's fascinating, isn't it? Like, we're developing mobile application, but we really don't take security into account. I'm talking about myself as a developer. Like, security probably is not my first things to do, right? Of course, we're not AppSec engineer. We're not supposed to do that. But there are certain levels that we definitely can follow and make our app even more secure, right? So if we're talking about security philosophy, we're probably come into 5 pillars of security risk or security keys, which is like a process. It starts from identifying what are those kind of vulnerabilities that we're talking about. It gets to a next stage, which is mostly detecting. And then, well, when you detect that, then you need to protect your application. Many of those security risks are very common. And then you go to the next step, which you need to probably have a process to report. And the next one, have some mechanism to always revert what is attacked, let's say. So this talk today is mostly going to actually focus on maybe the 3 first steps. So what are those common things? How can we protect? How can we identify? So what I'm going to talk about is, well, whatever I say today is based on some standards. Many of you perhaps are familiar with OWASP, Open Web Application Security Project. Well, that sounds a bit weird, like we're talking about web, but bear with me. We're going to have the mobile version of that too. We go through the top 10 security risks. We try to find out what is the problem with those, what are the solutions, and at the end of the day, I will introduce one of the newest, let's say, process of adding a security level to your application, which is RASP. Let me introduce myself very quickly. My name is Majid Hajian. I'm based in Oslo. I am head of DevRel at Invertase, and I do a lot of Flutter community things, which includes Flutter Vikings, YouTube, books, so on and so forth. Let's talk about Open Web Application Security. Who knows what is this project? Okay, that sounds good, because it gives me now a good feeling, because when I was preparing the talk, I was struggling to find out how I should prepare this talk. The security is very tricky. You can go very in-depth, talking about very detailed stuff. You can be in a level of just awareness. You can present many different ways. And now by seeing these hands, shows me like maybe 10% of these community here. I think I'm going to go through the path of awareness mostly, which gives you a lot of information about this project, what probably you have already faced, but you didn't know the name, and some solutions. This project is around for many years. It's not a new project. It's technically a project to address security risk in software development or in software generally, so to make software more secure. It started from web, and then slowly after taking over mobile, it also applies now to mobile applications too. There's always like a top 10 list recommended by, or announced by this project, which goes through the top 10 security risk. I deliberately added web and mobile here next to each other. The main reason is because many of the things that you see on the web, it actually applies to mobile applications too. You should take care of that too. It's not like because we are developing mobile application, we are really not going to have injection problem. We're not going to have like whatever other problem that web applications have. So many of them would apply. And hopefully some of the things that we go through today will also fix or try to have some, address some of these issues as well in our mobile applications. I would like to go through the mobile top 10 though and talk about each of them one by one and then see what's wrong with them and what kind of solution we can have, and particularly what we can do in Flutter for that. Let's get started. The first one is improper platform usage. This is the first security risk on the top 10 list. Technically, I try to digest a lot of content into one sentence. Technically means you're using some of the feature of the platform incorrectly, or you are abusing some of those features. Let's talk about permission in this case. If you're requesting for too many permission before you're building your application, this is a kind of like a security risk. You should not go over what you need. There are different solutions to that. Also, when we are publishing a mobile application, generally we need to follow some certain guidelines, publishing guidelines, These are the things that we need to keep ourselves up to date and always follow them. Not following them probably bring us some security risk at some point. So the first solution, let's get started, at least in Flutter world, what can we do for this one? Particularly, it's important to stay up to date. If you're using Flutter, try to stay up to date with stable branch. If you're using third parties, libraries, try to stay up to date for that. Try to follow the guidelines and publishing guidelines, on different platforms, as well as for this particular platform, like Flutter framework. So that's the first step. The second one is there are different solutions to handle different problems that you're going to face for this one. For example, permission. Instead of just maybe requesting for permission before building your application, maybe you can handle your permission during the time that user is interacting with your application, requesting for a camera or so on and so forth. Try to limit the access from the very beginning. There's a package for that, at least in Flutter world, that names permission handler, so you can definitely use that in your application. The second problem or security risk on top 10 is insecure data storage. It's quite common or at least I have seen that many times, that developers tend to store unencrypted data in a local storage where everyone at the time of attack, attacker can really read those data, especially if those data are sensitive. So one of the solutions for this particular problem is using encryption very effectively, or using libraries that are providing you secure way of storing your data, like cache or whatever. Let's talk about the sensitive data first. Definitely, in your application, you're going to face one of these sensitive data at some point. You may need to store them for any reason, right? One of the things that probably make your application a little bit more vulnerable is storing some of these sensitive data, especially unencrypted, in shared preferences. So how can you fix this? Even if you have to do that, you need to take this very seriously and encrypt your data. Generally, encryption is a good thing. You should get familiar with that. There are two solutions for Flutter developers in particular to fix this problem. One is probably very well known among Flutter developers, Flutter Secure Storage, where it's going to use the iOS keychain and also using key store-based solution in Android, right? So you can store your data, in secure storage, and you're pretty much okay. Another one is Hive. So you need to choose libraries that are taking encryption, and especially the new algorithm, into account and use them effectively. And one of them is going to be Hive. If you still need some kind of like key value store database with a security in place, then Hive is going to be one of them. That's not all. Like, sensitive data sometimes can be on the screen of your application. I mean, all the time, especially when you want to switch between different applications that they are open, and when app is going to be to background, right? This is a time that probably you want to also secure your application. You don't want to leak your sensitive, like the user-sensitive data in this case. Like using background snapshot protection solution will probably help that. There is a library that you can use in your application. Setting up that library is as easy as just a few lines of code. And that makes your application pretty much secure, so then when application goes to background, there is nothing that can be, you can take a snapshot of that. In secure communication, well, this is pretty valid maybe a couple of years ago, 5 years ago, where still HTTP was a thing, and I see that right now, even many APIs are still HTTP and like not really secure, right? So, but the idea, I mean, the problem, the insecure communication is about the data. We have 3 different types of data, right? Data that are in transit, like communication, they're at rest, or like the data that you're gonna use in your application. So unencrypted data, especially in transit, is pretty insecure, right? There are different solutions to fix this problem. Example, I mean, it's definitely, you probably have faced it at some point, using an HTTP API that really sends even sensitive data over wire with like clear text. So, well, there are solutions to fix this problem, and one of them is going to be just using a valid or a trusted CA certificates provider, and just have a valid TLS or SSL, certificate for your application. It's not about just mobile right now, but we're talking about the problems that you can even raise to your team or other team members. But in particular, one thing that you can do in Flutter especially, or any mobile application, is creating certificate pinning. So the idea of certificate pinning is like you create a channel between two clients that are just secure and they're just relying on a pin to validate, these data going and coming back. So there is a library, in fact, in Flutter world that is HTTP certificate pinning, where it's using SSL certificate pinning library under the hood to create this communication safe and secure. Let's take a look at that. You create some kind of fingerprints, like a SHA 256, and with this library, you can create a secure, client, and the other client can definitely take a look at that and make sure that the connection is secure between this one and the other one. In secure authentication, how many of you seen that in one application you open, maybe with some local authentication, user is authenticated, but communication has not been sent to backend to verify? It's quite common. Makes your application very vulnerable. You should not really just rely on local authentication, although local authentication, the strong one, like biometrics and stuff, it's important, but it should not be the only way to move forward. So the idea is to make sure, using the secure protocols, the standards, for example, OAuth 2.0, or the latest version is OAuth 2.1, and also OpenID Connect, and the standards that are already there and taking security into account. In fact, I have a full course on that on my YouTube channel, talking about authentication and authorization for mobile developers. So the first 2-3 videos are just about these standards. Different solution, how you can use it, and how you can implement it in Flutter. However, using a local authentication in your mobile application is going to be an important factor. So local auth is a library that you can use for mobile application to make sure that you can use the device, the features that device has, like biometrics, face detection, and others, to authenticate your user. That gives a higher level of security for your application. Insufficient cryptography. So there are many times in our application, we talked about it in the beginning as well, that we need to encrypt our data, but just encrypt our data with like depreciated algorithm, or the algorithm that are like vulnerable. So these are not good. I mean, just encrypting is not a good thing. So you should use algorithms that are like pretty valid, still valid, and they are also secure enough for your data. So let's take a look at that. So this is going to be interesting. So first of all, my recommendation is you should probably get to know some of the recent and more secure algorithm for cryptocurrency. That's one thing. Another thing is you should get familiar with the type of encryption, whether it's symmetric or asymmetric. Anyone knows what's the difference between these two? Pascal? No, go ahead. Tell me. Yes. The symmetric one is relying on just a fingerprint, right? And the asymmetric is relying on public and private key, technically. Just a very simple word if I want to say. So you need to understand what's the difference and when you should use what in your application to make your data secure enough. But let's take a look at some of the depreciated algorithms. Like, I'm pretty sure many of you have seen MD5 or SHA-1, and these are the algorithms that we already know that they're not secure enough, right? So it's important when you are thinking about using an algorithm, you already know what is depreciated, what is less secure, and then start using the other one that is more secure and like it's a standard like for the industry right now. One thing that I want to mention here is we need to secure. Now we know the cryptography. We need to know that we also need to hide whatever is for developer identifying. Like, we have a lot of keys in our application, you know, or configuration. These are the ones that you really need to encrypt them when you are developing your application or shipping your application. That's the first thing you need to think about. So there are, for sure, different ways to do that. Another thing that you can use in your application, especially Flutter, there are two libraries that I recommend take a look at that. So the one is crypto, another one is encrypt. Both are great, and both are suggesting different algorithms with different implementation, which is very nice, and API, I mean. So you can really like encrypt your data in your application, and especially if you want to store it in some local storage. So that's another thing that you should do, and this is one of the examples here that I see, I wrote for you. By the way, don't worry about the speed of the talk, so I will definitely share this slide. It's a lot of information. I do not expect you to digest everything right now, but definitely this is more about like an awareness. So you can go back to slides, slowly review them, and just go to each of them and take a look at the examples more in depth. Let's talk about authorization. Authorization is more about like who can do what, right? So what your user can do. And many times in many applications in the past few years, I've seen that developers are really relying on the client-side validation for authorization, which is super risky. And that's one of the security risks as well for mobile application. Your data must be verified. Your request must be verified with your backend all the time. This is something that you should take into account. Client is not really a good place to verify neither authentication nor authorization. So why we are talking about this, it's because of the next three ones that I'm going to introduce as well. And then we see how we can mitigate this problem. So another one is client code quality. This is generally meaning about third-party libraries and the guidelines, style guide, a consistent, design pattern that you have to use in your application. This makes your application more kind of in danger of like having more security risk. So one of the things that you should do probably to mitigate this particular problem is to enforce some kind of like design pattern for your application or a design code quality for your team. You can follow also like in Flutter world, you definitely have the effective Dart design. So you can take a look at that and also apply that in your application. Not even just coding, it's also about the way that you are developing your application. This must be all written in documentation, and people or developers should follow that. And next one is code tampering. We're going to talk about this a lot right now, and I think you probably have faced these issues at least once when you are developing your application. It's more of like when someone can attack your application and just, do something wrong with the app, injecting some code, or maybe having a root access to the platform itself, jailbreaks and stuff like that. So the obvious, things here is most likely jailbreak protection. I'm pretty sure like many of us would not even think about it when we're developing, but that's a common problem. So this is a time that we should think about like detecting this problem we talked about in the beginning and try to address this issue. And there are libraries, hopefully in Flutter community, that you can use, and simply they will detect that for you. One of them is going to be Flutter jailbreak detection. That's just a library. You wrap your main application, and you're good to go. Reverse engineering. I bet many of you have heard about. Who has not heard about reverse engineering? Okay, that's good. So we all know that we're talking about what we're talking about. So there are many ways actually to do that, right? Using some softwares and other ways that we're not going to talk about that. But the solution here is to make your application as hard as possible for people to reverse engineer that. Doing something like obfuscation or building binaries, which makes it a little bit more difficult to, reverse engineer. Let's take a look at that. So in fact, if you're a Flutter developer, you get these two things that I mentioned for free. You get obfuscation for Android and iOS, and I think for Mac OS for now. For web, you get minification, so that means technically obfuscation. And so for also binaries, that's something that you get from Flutter too. So generally, these are the good things that you would receive out of the box. Well, that's a good thing. I mean, not the obfuscation, you need to implement that, but generally, it's easy to implement, and you can do that. I just put the link so you can take a look at that. Sorry. And the last security risk on the list is redundant functionality. The functionalities that are not needed, or you're doing that for a different purpose, you forget to remove it, and it stays there. A lot of time we've done like a hard code password to just check maybe for testing, and then we forget to remove it. Or maybe doing some debugger log, and then we never remove that, and it just expose all of our logs, even in production, for whoever wants to check the logs. So these are the things that we should think about it from the beginning. But how can we now mitigate the last three ones as simple as possible? There is actually a new, it's kind of new, it's not like really new like for this year, couple of years, but there's a new methodology that says, that is named RASP, Runtime Application Self-Protection. The idea is you run some kind of mechanism in your application that is always monitoring, tracking the problems, and notify the user, and you can take also an action right away, either remotely or in the app. Like if you have these kind of problem with network requests, malicious requests, or you have jailbreak, routing, there are actually different things that you can do. But before I get to those type of attack, let me just talk about very quickly two things: static versus dynamic analysis. In parentheses, also test. So static analysis, anyone can tell me what could be the difference between a static or versus dynamic analysis? Any idea, please? Absolutely correct. Thank you very much. Like, Static is where you have the code still not building or during that time, so you're just checking everything there. But dynamic is more of like installing the application and just tracking that afterwards. So it's two different ways. And there are different attacks for both of them. Why did I say this? You will see it in next 2 slides. So the different attacks that you will face is, one of them is hooking, like, frameworks are just, or attackers just hook to your application, especially if they have root access, like jailbreak that we discussed, right? They can do a lot of things over there if they have root access. Like debugger and emulator, they're not really safe environment for application, but your application can be cloned and maybe reverse engineered and maybe run in the debugger or in emulator to get attacked. And also fingerprints. This is probably the most dangerous one, where they tampered your fingerprints in your application and try to request and act on behalf of you. This is very dangerous, right? These are the type of attack that probably RASP can help for that. There is a library, though. There is a good news for Flutter developers. There is a library, free RASP. It's a pretty new library, though. Maybe a couple of months. So from a company called TalexSec app, and they are just doing security for mobile application, and in particular, they built this based on the RASP, documentation. They built this application for free. Well, of course, they also have, this is freemium. You can pay to get extra things as well, but the free is good enough to get it started. Like, for example, I've written some of the things that you can simply detect on runtime, in your application. This is a great chance to make sure you're tracking your, attacks. You're notifying your user, like, oh, it's jailbreak. Maybe now we should just quickly get rid of everything in our storage and just shut down everything in the application and send a request to the backend or whatever, just say this is happening, or whatever else. There are lots of ways that we can think about it. This gives us a very great opportunity to track and monitor the runtime issues that is happening. I encourage you to take a look at free RASP library and take a look at that. So there are many other things that, of course, it's not possible to put on 30 minutes talk or 40 minutes talk. I really want to encourage you to think about security as a progressive enhancement in your application. Like, you need to progressively think about this. Like, you fix one thing and then you add another one and another one, and always keep up to date with what is happening. I know it's going to be a lot to learn and maybe implement, but the basics now we know, like, these are the most top one. These are the ones that you can do in your application. When you send this application to your AppSec engineers, they're going to test that. I'm not sure if your organization have that person, but at least you're proud of yourself that you passed the first 10 steps. And there are also many different security testing, penetration, black box, white box, gray, whatever. There are many of them that I can't really talk about it in 30 minutes. It's by itself, it's just a talk. But I encourage you to take a look at these resources. They're very easy to read, just a few pages. It gives you so many information, and most of my slides are also based on that. So you can go to this website. There are 2-3 white papers or ebooks that you can just download, a few pages, going through the standards and also the testing guides. Just read it once, and you can also introduce these checklists to your team members and maybe even automate that. As much as you can automate, you will be like, your life will be easier, definitely, right? And there are tools, by the way, that you can, they're already out there that you can use to just run through these security checklists. All right. We are pretty much on time. I see that I have 3 minutes. Thank you very much. I know that it was so theoretical and introducing many libraries, but I feel like security, especially in Flutter community, I've been involved many years, it's very underestimated. So we're not really take that into account. We developer really tend to fall into the category of people who are relying on default setting, which I encourage. Well, of course, default from trusted resources is good, but still, we need to have some knowledge about this and take that into account and apply it to our applications. My slides will be ready, will be available on slides.com/myhandler that you can see on the screen, and I'll be happy to chat with you. I'll be standing in the Flutter community booth today and tomorrow, and if you have any question or concerns or anything that you want to talk about, please feel free to come there and chat with us. Thank you very much for listening, and let me know how it goes with your security.